Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, everybody, our last presentation in this room for today. It's not your last name, Greg.
Shundler. Shundler, yep.
Didn't want to say it wrong. This is Greg Shundler from Thurston County, and he will be presenting on the League of Places, national and global comparables of your city, county, and state.
Thank you. Thanks for sticking around. This will be hopefully interesting. I'd love to talk to you guys about this idea later in the social hour. But we're going to talk about fractal geometry, data cubes, dimensions, the whole world at every scale, and all the public data that's available in the world, and the effort to join it all and host a conversation about it. Okay. So I work for the assessor of Thurston County, and it dawned on me one day, I'm working with a polygon data set, and we're talking about valuation, which is subjective, and where all the data that we can muster to try to make a predictive model for what sales will be. And so it dawned on me, well, we have a lot of polygons in GIS. The backdrop is we have a problem. Conservatives think public sector investments are a waste of money, and the typical liberal, let's say, will want to use public programs to solve problems. And it was interesting for me to learn that when you combine all the state, county, municipal spending, it's almost equivalent to federal government spending after transfers. So we have a tremendous amount of resources to, let's say, diverge evolutionarily from some of our other American places. So then it dawned on me, too, that the private sector is run through a stock market, which is a comparable framework. We taxonomize the tree of life. This is great. This is when life began. And this is today, and then it fans out into all the clades of life that we know on the planet today. And even our sports people like to see their tables of numbers, right? The Olympics, we're in Olympia. We have all these great government websites. I was curious one day, how much of our attention is captured by what? So these spheres, this is the universe of hits on the internet, Facebook, Twitter, Wikipedia. Reddit was a surprise to me. News media, a bunch of mid-sized planets all competing with each other. Government websites, they're like specks of asteroid dust, unfortunately. And so we have news media, government, open data, and social media, right? So what do we want to do for democracy, for the world? So the process of data science, you acquire data, you clean it, you organize it, you analyze it, you visualize it, you try to tell a story, and then you hopefully engage people and then re-engage them. Notifications, argument on Twitter, whatever. So there's problems with each stage of this. You have to find your data from different places. Most of the cleaning is highly programmatic and advanced. The organization is very thematic, Amazon, shopping, Yelp. The analysis is mostly on your desktop. The visualization, there's a lot of people who are trying to play in this space. Socrata, Live Stories, Data USA, Steve Ballmer, USA Facts, Social Explorer. Then there's storytelling, which is basically our news media. Wikipedia is a text-based platform. And then we have our social media, of course. So when you think about it, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's 4 meta dimensions of data. There's time, there's space, there's attribute, and the 4th one Einstein taught us about, which is source. It depends on how fast you're moving and how you perceive time in the universe itself. Most of what we get in the news media is a slice of this cube. Most of what we get from public data is a slice of this cube. OpenGov, Thurston County, great stuff. We have a lot of time, many years of Thurston County data. It's just one county, though, and it's a lot of attributes, right? Their taxes, whatever. What they're spending it on. You get something like U.S. News Best States. You're using a lot of attributes. You're 50 states, so a lot of places, but only one vintage, right? So they're all drawing from the same source data, so it's basically a giant cube of cheese. But the 4th source is, the 4th dimension is source. So we're all out here, those are decision makers, those are their eyeballs, that's the public. And we're trying to decide what is reality, right? Basically, that's what we're doing as mappers, data visualization. We're creating representations of reality so as to create common understanding and agreement. And we all have our own experience, education, exposure to time, space, and attributes over our lifetime. And that's what our brain is, right? And we're all looking at each other's cubes, making judgments about that as well. So polygons, I was talking about parcels. Here's the best polygon data set in the world. It's called Global Administrative Unit data set. And somebody, by the grace of the good earth, brought together all the boundaries of the nations, their subnational administrative units of the first order, we call them states. Of the second order, we call them counties. And then there's a couple more orders in certain places. And so those are the nations of the world. That's on every elementary school wall. But technology is all about resolution, right? More transistors on the chip, et cetera, et cetera. That's your states. That's your counties of the world. And NASA also blobbed together the blobs of lights on the surface of the Earth. So we're in the Seattle urban extent here, but you can still pick up something like Tahola, just a little speck. So those are polygons too. So we got a lot of cookie cutters, and we do have raster data shot by satellites. This is cool because it's not bottom up. This is actually how aliens would analyze their civilization, right? So here's our lights. They've sampled GDP from this and carbon. We have global land cover. And then, of course, you have your Koppen-Geiger climate classifications, bioregions, whatever you can get that's public. So that's, for example, the population by states of the world. And of course, the resolution is much higher. The United States isn't a 330 million person blob. So this is maybe like the aliens' shortcut to find out who's getting it right. Who's rich without burning the earth? GDP divided by carbon footprint. So you have two choices. You can live like somebody in the poor subtropics or in tropics, or you can live like, well, you know where the rich countries are. That's a numerator-denominator interaction. You can have a really high numerator, you can have a really low denominator, right? So that's, you know, the GDP that they sampled for the world. And so we'll just dive into Thurston County because that's where we are right now. Well, we're in the Red Lion Hotel, in a certain census block area, in a zip code, in a city, in a county, in a watershed, in a state. But we're on the planet Earth, right? So these are the Thurston counties of the world. The orange ones match our population density, and the red ones match our population. And we're kind of in the transition zone between two bioregions, kind of like the Willamette mixed forest kind of situation, and then the straight up temperate rainforest. So basically you can, you know, then if you really want to get exact, okay, we want to look, and this is totally arbitrary, 10%. I'd like to make sliders, but I'm not a programmer. 10% land area, plus or minus, so we're going 90% to 110% of where we're at. Land area, population density. So those are the Thurston counties of the world. In the United States, these are the Thurston counties of the United States. So then you have a short list, places you've heard of and maybe never heard of. And then you go to Google. You go to Google Images, Google Video, then you can add any search term you want. Public transit map, agriculture, investment, correctional system, whatever. Whatever you guys are interested in. So that's in Europe. Those are the Thurston counties of Europe. So we've got Germany and out in the Ukraine, Poland, Italy. And so this is like a non-traditional data visualization. The axis is carbon. It's orange. There is no X or Y axis. These are all the Thurston counties lined up like in kindergarten with the highest carbon person as the line leader and the lowest carbon person back here. And so what I have is GDP in blue and density in gray. So you see GDP and density definitely spike together. But then we find ourselves on the income curve as Thurston County. We're kind of on the lower side. So I want to find the lower carbon, higher income. So we're looking for the spikes to the left on this axis. This is just Excel. You put your data in, you have the same rows. You put your data in Excel as a line graph, and then you can sort by whichever axis you want from high to low. So yeah, that's Thurston County. This is the income. Now we have the income curve, which is gray, and this is our carbon per person. There's also an electricity generation data set for the world. That's our coal power plant. That is in Lewis County, but it's right on the border, and it's raster data, so we picked up the pixel, right? So then you can put all these places in the same map scale. Bonn, Germany; Bergen, Norway; Yamaguchi, Japan; Ibaraki, Japan; North Carolina, Union County; some part of Istanbul; Amori, Japan; Munster, Germany; and there's Thurston County, Washington. We have a bigger piece of the earth. We're not making as much money, and we're burning more fuel. I don't think we're getting the gold medal in this category. And so then you can do all sorts of ratios. These are the petri dishes that the aliens are looking at. Do they have pavement? Do they have forest? What's going on in their petri dish of human civilization, right? So, you go to the Google images. This is Thurston County, Yamaguchi, Japan. Bergen, Norway. Kind of looks like Bud Inlet in the upper right. And pedestrian zones and solar panels and windmills in Germany, and they have sustainability reports and climate reports that they've already published, and you can go as deep as you want to. It's been fun to watch tourism promotion videos because it looks like Thurston County, but then there's like Finnish people running around picking blueberries and mushrooms and going into a sauna, right? So it's a cultural conversation as well as a political conversation, right? New London, Connecticut, where Mystic Seaport is a Thurston County of Washington. Rockingham, New Hampshire is a Thurston County, New Hampshire. San Tammany Parish, Louisiana, paddleboarding. Would be nice to do that down there. We can talk about that later. So the idea is, truth comes to us through relativity. So there's a lot of applications for this, and if you're deriving them from national global data sets, you can use programming to iterate it. So you imagine Wikipedia, but the contributors need to be way fewer, and you just need a few programmers. So let's talk about local food in Thurston County, right? Well, we'll take the NLCD land cover change data, and we'll figure out 2 decades of sprawl, right? And then we'll get the county parks acreage from the USGS protected area database, as well as the city parks. And I'll get the addresses for the local food system from the newspaper, make that point data, pick up the parcels, and add that acreage. So we're relatively looking at, does local food actually defend against sprawl? What role does it play? Right? Here's where this petri dish is burning to sprawl along I-5, all this red and orange. And wow, there's some big local food tracts that are holding down some open space acreage. So I did it with the urban extents, and it turns out that Seattle is the highest GDP per capita, lowest carbon urban extent of its kind in the world, between 3 and 5 billion people. And here's Montreal, Quebec. The key is hydropower, actually. Scandinavia, the mountainous countries of Europe, we're way ahead in the race for carbon accounting in that way. So we're in an identity crisis as a country. We have all these different boundaries, watersheds, what's going on, who am I, where should I live, what are we doing here? Right, you can do this for any place. This was for Grace Harbor County. This is 10% versus 5%. You could vary your sliders. You could even use standard deviations. So you have relativistic, statistical likeness or outlieredness. So what I realized, this is like multidimensional. So we're looking at land area and population, and density is this on the graph, which is really 3-dimensional if you think about it. So there's Grace Harbor County. We zoom in on that universe of stars, and we can find the Grace Harbor counties of the country. And so we have Chelan and Lewis and Grace Harbor, Clallam, Coos, Humboldt. For some places, it may be relevant to say, well, Chelan's on the other side of the mountains. Coos and Humboldt are Pacific counties, just like Grace Harbor County. And that's their petri dishes again. You could do economic structure as well as land cover structures. So this would be like a DNA marker, and we're like, okay, Coos and Humboldt County almost look like Grace Harbor County, we're using not even statistics, but our brain and our eyes to be able to identify archetypes. And then there's Orleans and St. Lawrence are Vermont and upstate New York, similar water area. They have a mixed forest though, of course, you know, birch and maple and so forth, but a lot more agriculture up there. So what are they doing there? Dairy farms. But what about temporal reality? Because that's the other dimension of the cube. So last one, we're looking at, you know, land cover across different comparables. This would be time. My buddy's a farmer in Grace Harbor County, and I wanted to calculate how much of the peak grain production he had restored in 1 year by having 60 acres of organic agriculture out there. So you go to the National Agriculture Statistics Service and you get your time. And back in 1930, they had 2,000 acres of oats and winter wheat and orchards, and now it's Christmas trees, cranberries, pretty much. And anyway, so then the U.S. is even better than global because we have the best public data in the world, and we're not even using it. We've been investing it this whole time, and we're not even using it as a democracy. And we're blabbing away on social media, and they're worried about the Russians and fake news without realizing what we actually have to do to respond with, like in a very meaningful way, right? So this is the government finance database. It's the Census of government's data. It's from 1967 till 2015, 50 years of data for 20,000 cities, 3,000 counties, 50 states, 400 fields of data, 200 on the tax collection side, 200 on the spending side. Every column is the same. Police protection for the city is Olympia Police. For the county, it's Thurston County Sheriff. For the states, Washington State Patrol. For the U.S., well, I had to Google that. That's the Department of Defense budget, right? And you can then do per capita and normalize all of it, right? And so then you can have your stack. How much does it cost to defend me where I live, right? So yeah, that's when the data was collected from 1967 to 2011 for the counties. You have regularity every 5 years, and pretty much the same for municipalities. And then you can you think about like the humanities. Like my conservative uncle said, well, big cities and populated places, they spend so much more money on government. They're so inefficient. Those liberals, blah, 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 blah. So I said, all right, 50 years, 3,000 counties, population size versus per capita cost of government. R squared value, sorry, that's a specious assumption. There's overspenders and underspenders in every category, and you can even see the trail of inflation. It's probably LA County or something out there. Then you can use relativity, right? So regressive taxes, progressive taxes, income taxes as a total percentage of taxes. And then you got so this is all three dimensions. This is attribute relativity because we're doing a ratio. It's time relativity because we have different slices of time, and it's spatial relativity because we have 3,000 counties. So, that is 1972, law and order. Okay, let's take the line items, judicial, corrections, and police, and divide it by the total budget. 1972, most counties are less than 10% of their budget. 2012, right? Same map, 400 fields of data. I need a programmer. Or I need to learn it myself. So you can look at cheapest police force for a county like Thurston County was Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Is it because they're Amish or agricultural or why? I don't know. So this is these are the per capita items for where we are now. This is the city of Olympia, Thurston County, Washington State. Total cash securities, direct expenditures, retirement securities, revenues, total taxes, wages, expenditures. Okay, so here's Thurston County with a cloud of people in a population range of about 200,000 to 300,000 counties, population counties. And this is their total property tax load. So when that person comes into our office and says, this is the most outrageous county government ever. No, that's not true. Like, definitively. Okay. So that's, and then you can keep going with all that sort of thing. when I was working for WSU Mason County, the commissioner was concerned that the sheriff's budget was too high at $18 million. What does that mean? When we look at these numbers, we have no idea what that means because there's no relativity. We can look in one county and say, well, it's been going up in this county, but is that reasonable? So I looked at, I did my analysis. The sheriff came back and he said, yeah, but we're rural. Okay, filter. Yeah, but we have a drug problem. Okay, we're poor. We have Gini coefficient, whatever you want, an uninsured rate. Just the conversation never ends. How many filters you want? Let's do it. Right? And it turned out that they, no matter what, they were at the top of the charts. And it turns out, and you never know how this stuff works out. A news article a few weeks ago, they just slashed it by $1 to $2 million, the sheriff's budget. And, you know, of course, he's, well, anyway. But there's also something like, everyone's gone down the rabbit hole, right? You have Robert Wood Johnson's done 100 health metrics for every county, you know? And then someone's done Gini coefficients for county. It's just a data join. Now it's time to join the data and talk about it all, right? So then this is like, Mason County is an outlier on percent physically inactive. Alcohol impaired driving deaths is a real problem there, okay? Even among its delinquent peers, one could say. Excessive drinking as well. So yeah, you know, law enforcement, but then what are you getting for what you spend, right? That's an interesting conversation. So you have your crime stats and then you have your, you know, your budgetary information. So that's Mason County floating at the top of the chart after all the filters, way above the trend line. And what's really cool, then you look in these other places I've never heard of, like these other counties, and you just Google news search. Botetourt County, never heard of it. Botetourt County sheriff budget. Google News, small town political corruption, right? Is there data behind the story, and is there story behind the data? That is the essential question of our times. And then there's performance, like, okay, this is all the horrible crime things that happen, robbery, burglary, and theft, and aggravated assault. They're all different scales. So we have to think about relativity in time. 1.0. Each metric starts at 1.0. How did it behave over that time? The dashed line is population growth, right? So what's a real problem in Mason County? Motor vehicle theft, right? Forcible rape was a real problem, and then something happened here. So then you can even get into your mathematicians, statisticians. Let's look for derivatives. I want to find the Mason County that reduced its forcible rape rate over the past 10 years the best. What did they do to do that? What happened there? What is the story? And then it's already pre-filtered for relevancy for the stakeholders. Well, this has never been done before. Well, no, it actually has been done before, and this is exactly how it goes. So I was talking about stacking your different spatial scales. I don't know if you're familiar with Russian dolls, you know, but this is like this is the fractal design of the universe, right? So the USA is blue, Washington State is green, yellow is Thurston County, red is City of Olympia, and these are just some of the many categories. So we have expenditures, revenue, debt outstanding, public welfare. This is per capita, right? So if I live in Olympia, this is my per capita contribution to the salaries and wages buckets for each of those things. So which public employees are the most expensive per capita, right? That said, different places have different shares of, let's say in New England, the counties don't do anything but sheriff. And so 90% of the budget goes to sheriff. It doesn't mean they have a crime problem. It's just how they distribute that between the city, county, and state, and that will vary from place to place. So there's a little speciation there. We talked about taxonomy. And then same data, this is just relative, you know. So for our protection, this is the US military, and there's Putin and all his Russian dolls, and we're worried about the Russians, not thinking about what we can do as Americans with the Enlightenment, data, sharing, and having an eternal town hall like Wikipedia, right? You can take other boundaries like the fan bases. So unequivocally, the whitest, most carbon-intensive fan base is the Pittsburgh Steelers, their region. That can be said. Okay, internationally, happiness and gender inequality, who do we cluster with? We cluster with Oman and the United Arab Emirates, right? And then if there's a recipe on the national level, do we have the data for that on the state level, county level, city level, and all the fractal dimensions? So all this work that has been done down all these rabbit holes can be leveraged. So ethically, we're Americans. 7th-generation philosophy is temporal dimension. It's the same thing as the golden rule in time, not space. Do unto others as you have do unto you in the present and the future, right? So that was and then there's, if you're not a Christian, there's Kant, who's like, okay, let's think about this Enlightenment style. Okay, everything I should do, I should think about if everyone else is doing it, how the world would look. It's basically like the non-theological golden rule. And again, that's ethics in space, and 7th generation is in time. So as Americans, it's basically our task to show the world that we can live together as diverse people and sustain the earth. And these are all just little proof of concepts down any of these rabbit holes. We have a closed estuary down there. South Carolina, same population as Olympia, Tomar, and Lacey combined. I know Charleston, South Carolina has a lot of cool stuff that we will never have. But they have a tourism economy that's 14 times our size, And it's like, what is the cost of that place, right? Of that thing being closed. So relativity. This is our tourism dollars per capita and gross for all Cascadian cities. We're the lowest. Amazing, right? This is the highest employment sectors for the private sector are retail, trade, and food services and accommodations. They're totally tourism related. These are their income over the past 12 years, stagnant. Here's what a lot of us in the public sector, this is public sector wages over the same time, and the black dots are average. So tactically speaking, looking at other places that are like us, what do we do? What do we do to develop our economy? What makes sense? What's a cool design? What would actually make us even unique and worth visiting? So anyways, that's where we are, Olympia, Washington. If you don't live here, I hope you get around and get into all those portals that will tell you what's to do around here. And this is diving down the Olympia, Thurston County rabbit hole. We can do it anywhere, any place, any topic, right, that we have public data for. And so that's what I'm working on, and definitely looking for collaborators if people are interested. The sky's the limit with this one. Wikipedia uses text. Too much talk. Data visualizations, right? And you saw, there's 3 basic data visualizations, one for each dimension. The time, you saw time relativity 1.0. Space, the map, and attribute is regression, right? So if you have 3 choices of data visualizations, you can have a conversation about one place and iterate that conversation for every place in the world in the same set. So that you can have the local food conversation before the people have it, and they can look it up on Wikipedia. And then they can argue about whether they use the right filters or not, and upvote and downvote them, and give them 100 words of text, right? And it's an educational tool. The 5th graders can fill it out for us, and the decision makers can, look at it at home. They don't have to go to public meetings anymore. Who wants to do that? So that's the idea, and the idea is if there's a better way to do it, you find it, right? So. Thanks. Any questions?
Well, you can solve the problem of liberal and conservative attitudes by showing people what works. It's fake. Numbers don't lie. So maybe you're mad at it, but it's not going to do any good.
Totally. Visualizing the source dimension is the next challenge. Definitely have to host that conversation because not all the data is perfect, and people can really split all the hairs they want to. And if we retain it in one place, pretty much every conversation only needs to be had once. And if we record it in an efficient way, wow, we can really get up a learning curve pretty fast.
That brings up a serious point, though. I mean, how do you reconcile what you said there? I think everyone in this room seems to recognize that, with some caveats, you can rely on a lot of that information, or you can understand the reliability of it. But if you just simply live in a world where, I hate to say it, alternative facts, that's going to get dismissed instantly.
Potentially. right? I mean, the idea is to form agreement reality, like what is reality? And some people could reject it wholeheartedly, but what's their plan, you know? And I mean, if the plan is truly, has examples, those are the stories then. Because then the news, the data, their fake news or whatever, then you actually have stories, you know? Like, hey, in Europe, the story is this. They developed in the equestrian pedestrian era, and they have a much more nodal petri dish, you know?
Right, right.
And we are Model T Ford, and that's the story, and it shows in the data.
Define success and see how close you can.
Well, right. I mean, you need. It seems like this fits within a larger framework, if you like, that is establishing the value of this. Just like any modeling. I mean, you do that. There's verification for it, and then acceptance or whatever. But it's worrying because a lot of people just don't think that way unless they're trained that way. And so that's why I mean it's attractive to put it into schools. For example, and get kids thinking that way because they may grow up thinking of that cycle of validation and.
I think what's upon us, if we can't be efficient and make all the decisions we need to as democracies very rapidly with what we're facing and declining budgets and climate change and everything, authoritarians will rule the earth. So this is like for Western democracy. Like if we don't figure this out, we will, repeat the cycle of history. So it's a revival of the American Enlightenment through data science. And then bigger than that, the humanities can now be subject to hypothesis testing. So there's a book called Everybody Lies, and it's a big data analysis of Google searches. And it's richer than any psychology experiment that could ever be had, than any survey that anyone's ever written, And so that's what we're moving into in an era of big data. And the humanities is politics and history and psychology. And yeah, so that's the exciting thing. That's what's happening all around us, But it's never, no one thinks about the public sector because I'm in Thurston County. I'm in King County, I'm in a place just like yours, but we don't have geographical adjacency. When you zoom in on a map, all you're doing is filtering the space dimension. But all those other dimensions of data, you can do the same thing. I'm going to zoom in just this way, in this attribute, in this length of time, and it's multidimensional.
The other attractive thing about that is that, if you're a school kid in America, you might not get exposed to all those other Thurston counties and where they are and what have you. I come from a country, we used to rule the world, and we're working on re-establishing it somehow by buying Burger King or something.
Or you can teach us how to gracefully,
that's right.
Yield the stage.
So, but it's interesting because when I came to this country, I moved to Buffalo, New York, and I said I was sharing a flat with a lady, a girl from Rochester, New York, and which is 60 miles away, and she said, "Oh, what are you doing this weekend?" And I said, "I'm going to the Welland Canal," and she said, "What's that?" And I thought, you can't be serious.
Yeah.
You were born and raised in Rochester, and I should check to see if I attended anyone. You know what the Welland Canal is? All right, nobody knows what the Welland Canal is. Anyway, it's the seaway that connects. It's the canal that connects two of the Great Lakes to bypass Niagara Falls. But I don't know where I learned that. I learned that in a geography lesson when I was about 9 or something.
Totally.
And that's just British geography for you.
You went to school.
Sorry.
You went to a school where they taught you that.
Well, yeah, but my point isn't my school's better than anybody else's. My point is that it emphasized that. And I think that's a valuable thing to know because from that I learned about trade, movement, and all that sort of stuff.
Of course, yeah.
And I have that awareness, But if you
But
take this
and to respond, like if you think of geographically, why did Europe develop? It's because you have so many entities so close to each other with these indented coastlines, always overlooking the border and saying, is there a better way to kill people, build a city, take care of your poor people? And they're constantly in this cultural competition. And we don't have that going on in the way that this can really get that going in an Olympics framework. Who gets the gold medal for this and that and the other thing,
If you wanted to ask Greg more questions, it's time, and you can meet with him afterwards. Greg, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm sure there'll be many questions.
Thank you for your attendance this afternoon, and we're